Good morning and welcome back to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at MarketSite, we have Stephen Ricchiuto, who's the U.S. chief economist for Mizuho Securities. We're going to focus on the global growth of the U.S. and global economy. Thank you so much for joining us here
my pleasure.
Today. And let's talk about the risk of the curve inverting. That seems to be a tangent that you are on in your economic notes.
Well, clearly there was a risk that the curve was going to invert, and now that the Fed has, I believe, blinked about a week or so ago when Jerome Powell talked at the Dallas conference, I think we've kind of eliminated the near-term possibility of a curve inversion. But what I think most important is you have to understand is that even if the curve did invert in this particular period, a lot of economists were concerned about a recession. Recessions only happen as a result of curve inversions when there are imbalances in the underlying fabric of credit quality, i.e. if companies are very over-levered, they're short their duration, they've got a rising debt burden, then you can have a curve inversion lead to a recession. None of those conditions are there, so the fact that the curve is flattened so much just simply argues for slower growth in 2019.
So you think that the trajectory is going to either remain the same or go lower going forward?
Well, I think, we had this nice uptick in 2018, and you can credit it either to the Trump tax cuts or you can credit to weather and a bunch of other one-off factors that just happened to come together. I think the growth numbers of close to 3% are drifting back down towards the 2 to 2.25%, and I think that's what we'll average for all of next year.
Now, what about globally?
Globally, the economy is doing exactly the same thing. The global economy got a nice uplift when the U.S. dollar appreciated dramatically, and the dollar then devalued significantly. And now the uptick that we're seeing in the dollar really isn't enough yet to kind of coalesce growth overseas. And when you combine that with the fact that commodity markets have been hit as a result of energy, but also the currency, when you combine that with the fact that global growth, in particular from Asia, is starting to slow down with the tariffs beginning to bite on China, you see that the global trajectory is towards softer growth as well.
Let's talk about those tariffs, because out of the G20, the markets seem to interpret that news as a good thing. But it sounds, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, kicking the can down to March 2019 doesn't sound to me as if anything has been resolved and we're going to go through this uncertainty for another 3 months.
You're 100% correct, and this is where I think people want to rush to judgment about these things, but when you're dealing with these types of trade negotiations and you look at the history of the U.S.-China negotiations since Trump has been in office, we've had these fits and starts. And there's a threat of a tariff, and then there's a delay of imposing a tariff, then there's an imposition of a tariff, and I think we're in that process. I think to a certain extent, Trump wants to drag this out as long as he possibly can. It sells well in America. He's already in the process of running for re-election. Right. They don't have the opportunity, because they lost the House, of coming with a middle-class tax cut, which he clearly seemed to want to do. So I think now you're going back to the two basics of trade war with China and immigration being the primary two pillars that he's going to run on in 2020.
Well, looking back even before the history of Trump, does it normally take this long for trade negotiations to go on? It's been 2 years.
It takes years.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of this happens behind the scenes, and this is just unusual for everyone, that policy is being not dictated, but being brought to the forefront on social media.
You're 100% correct that normally trade negotiations are done behind the scenes. This administration does a lot of things differently than previous administrations, and this is nothing more than that. It's moving it to the front stage because, to be honest with you, this is a key election pillar. This is one of the things he ran on. It's one of the reasons why he got elected. It's one of the reasons why he hopes he gets to be re-elected. So letting it look as if it's being done in the background and nothing's happening on it, when he can get as many headlines as he possibly can, he's going to go for the headlines.
But this is nothing out of the norm in terms of how negotiations typically take place.
It's nothing. It's completely out of the norm for how negotiations typically. It's not out of the norm for how Trump behaves.
Right. I don't want to say oxymoron, but who knows? All right. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us at MarketSite. I appreciate having your insight as always, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.